Welcome to Office 365 Beyond the Basics. This is the first video of 3 representing a live presentation that Bob Marks and Renee Codner made to audiences in February of 2019. This isn't a basic coverage of Office 365. More, it's an intermediate look at some of the applications that are less well known. And in that way, we aren't going over the different plans that are available or the general subscription model, for instance, that's available of Office 365. It's assuming that the audience already understands the basic outline of what Office 365 provides. The agenda for the 3 videos coming up will be a general coverage of the Office 365 universe and all of the wonderful apps that are available to subscribers, including many of the lesser well-known applications. In the first video, we'll focus on SharePoint and OneDrive for Business and OneDrive Sync. We'll talk a little bit about Teams as well. But in the second video, we'll focus in on Skype for Business and its evolution into Teams, and how Teams can be used to organize smaller groups for focused work in particular departments or special project groups. Finally, in the third video, we'll talk about PowerApps and Flow and how they're derived from the common data model and common data services, and how these two really exciting applications can develop efficiency within your business environment. Office 365 is the evolution of the traditional packaged Office products into the cloud as a subscription model. Depending upon the plan that you buy, it will or will not include business class email, document storage, online meetings, and so on and so forth. A benefit of the subscription model is the ability to load your Office desktop applications to more than one device. You can have up to 5 devices, PCs and Macs, a combination of which per user license. If you have mobile devices and tablets, you can even add additional applications to those devices, bringing your number of places you can use Office to as many as 15 different places. When one first goes to the office.com portal and you sign into your business account, you'll get a home page that shows typically a dozen or so applications. Usually these are your favorites that you go to all the time. To explore all your apps, you'll see that a great number are hidden away that most people aren't even aware of. A few years ago, Matt Wade and Niels Johansson, 2 individuals not associated with Microsoft, put these applications and elements together in what they called the periodic table of Office 365. I find it a good way of keeping the different applications organized into smaller family groups, and really helps me understand how the different applications relate to one another. For instance, all of the Outlook features, email, calendar, contacts, or what they call people, tasks, and to-do lists and all that, that were associated with the Outlook functions are grouped together here on the periodic table. Likewise, Up in the upper right corner are all of your common applications, Word, Excel, OneNote, PowerPoint, and so on. You'll notice these say online, but it also are the desktop versions in my mind. Because this is a video covering beyond the basics, we won't do these in this video. Instead, we'll be concentrating on SharePoint and OneDrive, Skype and Teams, and PowerApps and Flow. These 6 make up the subject matter for these 3 videos that will last approximately 30 minutes each. And we'll begin with an exploration of OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online. Office 365 focuses on collaboration. It improves the way we work together, making us more efficient and productive. It focuses on bringing connectedness to our companies by allowing us to share documents and data instead of just copying it and sending it via email or loading it on a file share that nobody can know exactly where it is and so on. It allows us to author documents together. It allows us to stay better in touch. The key applications that allow us to focus on collaboration are OneDrive for Business, Teams, SharePoint, and when it comes to communication, it'll be Skype later on. We find that email is not a very collaborative application. It's been around a long time. We've grown to rely on it, but it's quite inefficient as far as a collaborative application. Disconnected documents that you might have on your workstation or stored somewhere in your personal drive or on the share drive that may not be easy to find are not very collaborative. And SharePoint allows us to bring documents together in a place that is easy to share and easy to find. Often, when we make the migration to Office 365, we're faced with these 2 new applications, SharePoint and OneDrive, and the question often comes up, where is best to store my documents and my files? Do I use SharePoint, or when can I use OneDrive? And in order to understand and have a way of thinking about these, I'd like to introduce a new concept. The concept I'd like to introduce is me, we, and all of us. If you're talking about a document or a file that you're working on that isn't ready for prime time, it probably belongs in your OneDrive for Business. If you're working in a team environment or in a department environment where we're sharing certain files or working on certain files as a team, then perhaps storing them inside of your team makes a lot more sense. That's sort of the we of me, we, and all of us. And speaking of all of us, when you have documents or lists or data, processes, and so forth that you want to share with your entire company, this is a good place for SharePoint. So let's discuss OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business is like any other file directory in the cloud. It allows for creating of folders and allows you to store loose files as well. OneDrive for Business started as SkyDrive. It was renamed later to OneDrive for Business. And it shouldn't be confused for the personal OneDrive you might get if you had signed up for an Outlook.com email or registered a Microsoft product and had to create a Microsoft account. You were possibly given a personal OneDrive. OneDrive for Business is a much more capable storage area. It also allows you to sync your OneDrive files and folders to a local copy on your laptop so that if you're ever disconnected from the internet, you can continue to work and resync your documents to the latest version that you had just finished or worked on. It is ideal for sharing a few files with a few others, but it isn't SharePoint. And these documents are probably still of a personal or closely held nature. OneDrive for Business is functionally similar to iCloud or Google Cloud, Dropbox, and other cloud storage services. And as I said before, it's really not meant for company files. Administrators can be set up to have access to personal OneDrive for Business accounts. What I mean is business accounts, OneDrive for Business accounts. It can replace personal drives, like in our company we call them an H drive, but other companies have set them up on the company servers for storing personal files that other people don't have access to. It could replace those personal company drives. OneDrive for Business, as I said, can allow you to send a link or share a document. And when you're sharing a document, you're really sharing permission and a location for someone else to access that document and work on it as well, or simply view it if that's the extent of the permissions. But by sharing or sending a link, you can actually work on this document at the same time, as long as this document is in the cloud in your OneDrive for Business. It allows you to easily see which documents are being shared with you and which documents are being shared by you. Using the sync capability, it can create a copy of the documents in your OneDrive onto your local laptop or your workstation, which, as I said, can allow you to have a copy even if you're disconnected from the internet. When you load OneDrive Sync, you see a little icon down in your system tray and an indication of which files or folders you're syncing. It places a little shortcut in your favorites area of your file directory, and it shows you by the little green check mark whether or not the file has a healthy sync, whether it has been synced up. OneDrive Sync is often confused. It's only meant for small folders or small active files that you're working on at the time. It's not meant for a big company document backup. It's not meant for backing up every document you put in your OneDrive space. And it's certainly not a substitute for SharePoint or a network drive. It can be very tricky, for instance, if more than one person is backing up the same file. Let's discuss SharePoint Online. I point out online because SharePoint started life as an on-premise application. The benefits of using either the on-premise or in our case, the SharePoint Online application, is that it really eliminates islands of poorly shared information inside and outside your organization. Many people use SharePoint to allow you to have connections to clients to allow them to see certain files and folders without having to set up, in the old days, we set up FTP sites and other complicated ways of sharing files with outside companies. SharePoint allows you to do that much more efficiently and set up permissions and access controls. It makes finding documents and data and even people much easier. It controls out-of-date versions of documents, allows check-in and check-out capability, and it allows quick and easy, what I might call application development. Applications may be too strong a word. Maybe it allows you to create workflows, alerts, approval processes, and so on that might take much more programming skill in another environment. Because SharePoint is built on a SQL Server database model, the data is much easier to find, analyze, and eventually share out. SharePoint is not a substitute for your network drive. There are many things that you wouldn't want to place in SharePoint. So there's still a reason to keep your traditional shared drives available, or some way of having documents and files in a more traditional structure. I think of SharePoint as a toolbox or a platform for creating dozens of different kinds of sites or applications. We talked a little bit about content management, but you can create project portals or blogs and social media areas, wiki areas, training spaces, and so on. SharePoint sites look like any other websites. SharePoint sites are accessed via browser, just like any other website. And so each page has URLs and so on. There are two different looks or experiences within SharePoint today. The modern look that we had just seen, and this, the more classic look, more text-oriented. Think of SharePoint as a very powerful combination of SQL databases that hold your data and your files, along with HTML coding to display and organize it. In other words, they use the language of the web to display and access complicated SQL database backend. SharePoint sites, like any other site, are constructed of pages, and in those pages, web parts. All activity within SharePoint then takes place within these web parts, which are either document libraries or lists. A document library, or just library, contains files like Excel or Word documents, what have you, where lists contain data records, or like access records, or possibly Excel lists where you have columns and rows. To build a SharePoint site, you need to organize your data within what we call applications. These applications then are inserted into a page via a web part. A web part is simply a particular view or instance of that application on that site. So if you have an app holding a document, you could have more than one web part displaying links to that document on different pages that are sorted by different or alternate views of that data. In this way, you can represent and display your data and your files in multiple ways to multiple audiences with multiple permissions, but ultimately it's all referring back to the same single data point or the same single file. So again, apps are the holders of your data, and they're either document libraries, as I said before, or some form of list. SharePoint has different web parts already created that organize your data towards a particular aim. For instance, you might have announcements or discussion blogs or custom lists or picture libraries. So it organizes and gives you a little head start by offering you many different kinds of apps which you can then put your data into or your documents into. As I said before, then you create new apps to hold your data. And then these lists or these libraries are enhanced by adding columns or metadata or additional fields which are descriptive and adds information about that document or a different field for that record. For instance, here we have a list of attendees with their title or name, their interest, their address, and I could add other columns here, their company or their age or whatever I felt was important to keep track of by adding columns or metadata. Here you can see a library with multiple columns or metadata that's added to define the record or that particular document. In other words, it could be a schematic, or it could be identified by client or document type, or even who approved it, who authored it, what kind of access, which team. However you want to organize it, you can add descriptive columns. These descriptive columns will be used by the views. A view sorts the data by the metadata, or sorts the documents by using these column information or the metadata. It allows you to filter out certain things or group certain documents together, total up numbers, and so on. Show them inside of folders or outside of folders, and so on. A web part is this application's view on a particular page in a site. So here, for instance, we have the application called Solutions inserted into a page, and all the views or different types of views that you could call up within this page are indicated right in the web part. Now, you don't have to do this. You could have a single view in a web part and have different pages showing the different views. So it depends upon what you want to accomplish. It's very flexible. The benefits of using SharePoint for document collaboration are many. We talked about the use of meta tags, which allow us to create custom document views. And even though it may take a little bit after the initial save, everybody has productivity gains from the ability to do extremely fast text searches and searching on the metadata. There's integrated workflows that allow you to create approval cycles or alert cycles. And there's powerful linking using web hyperlinks within the SharePoint environment. Versioning, we talked about, checkout capability. One thing about versioning, which is very interesting, is you can set up to save maybe up to 100 or so different versions of major and minor changes. These versions are stacked beneath the active version, hidden away from view, but you're able to go into any document and look at the other versions of it, even calling up an old one and making it the active view. So versions are not cluttering up a folder, but they're hidden away, accessible, but it keeps the SharePoint site, the SharePoint folders, the SharePoint libraries very clean. Because they're web-based, the documents are available anywhere. You can set up alerts, as I had said, and it's easy to share out these documents to external users. A feature that I like is being able to use your mouse over the triple dots here, or the ellipses, and it'll show you a thumbnail of what that document looks like. Sometimes I can't remember what a document was named, but I do remember what it might have looked like or what content was. And so this prevents me or allows me to open or look into documents without having to open them up and close them and open and close and so on. I can quickly find the document that I'm looking for. It eliminates the traditional deep folder or file structure. The questions, where did I put it, and is this the one that's approved, and is this the same one that was emailed to me earlier, and so on. All those confusions that we've lived with for so long, SharePoint tries to eliminate those difficulties of the traditional folder and file. We talked about having the ability to put specialized access control on different libraries and different folders. It's much easier than in the traditional file or directory environment. It overcomes the extremely slow search of trying to find a file in a file manager. It allows us to put compliance rules in place, and it eliminates the multiple copies and multiple versions that's so confusing. It's important to know that SharePoint is still evolving. The shift, as I had said earlier, is to SharePoint Online. In fact, the on-premise version is been sort of demoted and will get some of the features of SharePoint Online over time, but only if it works in the on-prem environment. So the principal focus and development is happening in SharePoint Online. SharePoint is evolving into the modern experience from the old classic experience. What does that mean? A modern experience page is more bright, tile, graphic-oriented. Where the classic experience page is much more text-oriented. Presently, however, and we're speaking about the early part of 2019, the classic view is still a more capable experience. The web parts are more fully fleshed out and developed. However, one of the big pluses for the modern sites and the modern experience is its ability to resize pages depending upon which device you're viewing them on. And modern sites work better with the modern applications of PowerApps and Flow. Sites also relate differently in the modern versus classic experience. In the traditional SharePoint environment, SharePoint sites were organized in a hierarchical architecture, where site collections were the first step, and then you had sites and subsites under that. And permissions were inherited from the level above. The new modern SharePoint sites use more of a hub site relationship where site collections all can borrow from branding and navigation and search functions from what they call a hub site. In the beginning, SharePoint sites had built-in workflows that worked within SharePoint. But now SharePoint is moving and becoming part of Microsoft Flow, which allows you to have workflows and processes that automate activities across applications, even outside of SharePoint. So SharePoint can call up and send data to Outlook or get data from Salesforce, for instance. And lists are being able to be moved directly from the modern experience directly into PowerApps. The migration to SharePoint is not an all or nothing situation. As I said before, there's still a need for file shares. Use SharePoint when documents are active or they're used by many other people. They're subject to change or used by teams or project groups. Small or mid-sized documents work best. Files and folders that benefit from the ability to put tags and links are really tailor-made for SharePoint. Files benefiting from indexing or needing to be searched fast. These are when SharePoint really shines. Use file shares when you have archival files or additional backups. When you have huge or large file sizes, such as installation files or system management update files, static files that are unchanging or seldom needed. And of course, because SharePoint is a database, it is unwise to store a database within a database. Now, mindsets when converting to SharePoint. You really only get the benefits if file migration is implemented correctly. You don't want to deploy it as just another file copy and drag and drop a whole directory over to a whole library. Think about how your libraries might be set up. So don't have a huge, massive library. Think about how and who is using these documents as you set up your SharePoint environment. If IT is building your SharePoint sites, make sure that they're using vernacular and terms, metadata, fields, and column names and things like that, that other people understand instead of them using some sort of codes or shortcuts or abbreviations that makes it difficult to navigate by the common person. If you're going to move to SharePoint, you should use the meta tags or metadata completely, and it makes searches and every part of SharePoint work better. And please clean up old and don't transfer obsolete files to SharePoint. Leave those as an archive or get rid of them, since it's probably just unused anyway. If you're going to make the migration to SharePoint, take time to do it right. Don't rely on third parties to just take all of your data and throw it into SharePoint. All you're going to do is have a mess moved to another mess. There are some SharePoint limitations that you should be aware of. It is a database after all. There are storage limits. Right now, it's 1 terabyte per tenant plus 10 gigabytes per subscribed user or user license. You can purchase as much space as you want, but understand that under the plans, they do limit your spaces, although 1 terabyte is an awful large SharePoint site to begin with. There are character limit sizes for file and folder path names and so on. So you can't have deep file structures inside of SharePoint where the path becomes very long, or if you're using long folder names, becomes a problem. Invalid characters or unsupported folder names is an issue. This is built on limitations of a SQL database. And there are invalid file types. You can't store exe files, ini files, bat files, and so on. Files that may contain harmful macro capabilities that could bring malware into a SharePoint site. And there are view and sync limits for document libraries. You can't have tens of thousands of files all in a single view, but they have to be broken up. So your libraries might have to be subdivided, and your views might have to be have page views of so many hundreds of items per view. So this comes to the end of our first video, where we've covered the Office 365 environment and focused on SharePoint and OneDrive Sync. I encourage you to check out the other 2 videos in this series, and I thank you for viewing this one.